Hey friend! So I wanted to kind of break down how a lot of quilters price their work because I myself am also a quilter, and I thought that it would be beneficial for my YouTube channel to kind of share how quilt pricing kind of breaks down. Now, if you are a crafter and you do any other kind of craft, you can apply some of the same stuff to yours as well, but as long as it works for you, that's what matters. Doesn't have to work for everybody and their brother, it just has to work for you. So come up with a system that works for you. And at the end of this video, I will also kind of share how I came up with my kind of pricing for my stuff, in which I do custom and non-custom things. So with quilt stuff, a lot of times people will charge for their time, in which time is the biggest factor, because some people will charge you a buttload of money per hour. A lot of people will charge you like $45 an hour, or somewhere in that ballpark. But for me, that's a bit ridiculous. Yes, I've been sewing and quilting for quite a long time, but I want to be as fair to you guys as humanly possible. So I personally only charge $15 an hour because I don't want to break somebody's bank, but I also want to be able to provide the joys of a quilt, because quilts are made with a lot of love and they're not just cranked out by machine and thrown on a rack. They're made with love, consideration, and a lot of thought. So time is a big one. And you can peruse all you want, but most likely everybody's going to tell you at least something different than the next person. But you have to decide what's best for you, the customer. Number two, they also charge for the fabric because, let's face it, if you don't have fabric, you're not going to have a quilt. Now, if you are doing a t-shirt quilt, that's a little bit of a different thing, in which t-shirt quilt or memory quilt, because it works for all ages, whether it be infant stuff or adult stuff, any age works. There's this thing called interfacing that you have to attach to the shirts once you get them to the size that's desired for making that quilt. So the interfacing also kind of counts as like your fabric for the t-shirt quilt, because with t-shirt quilt or memory quilts, a lot of times you don't have a lot of other fabrics other than like the sashing that goes between, or any other kind of like thing that works with your pattern for your quilt that you're working on making. Then the next thing is the batting, which the batting is what goes between the top and the back. It's basically part of what makes the quilt a quilt, because without the batting, you've just got two things of fabric, one that just looks super nice, and then the other one that's either plain or with some kind of print. So the batting is what goes in the middle. And then you also charge for the thread. Now with the thread, everybody can charge something different. It's really up to the crafter how much they charge. But that really goes with everything with the quilting world. Everybody's going to charge you most likely something a little bit different than the next person. But for me, I try to make everything as fair as possible. I've got a Joann's discount, so I mean, people can get fabric on their own, or they can go through me and get a discount. But with that being said, when it comes to deciding who you're going to buy a quilt from, you really have to look at the people's work. See if anything catches your eye. See how they interact with you. If they're wanting to work with you, that's great. But there are some that are just like, okay, it's my way or the highway. And which for me, that defeats the whole purpose of the craft. Because with quilting, you've got to make the customer feel appreciated and valued, because this is their time as well. It's not just yours. Um, so I take my quilting stuff very seriously, and I appreciate everybody that has supported me on my journey thus far. So with coming up with pricing for how much your time is worth. Number one, how experienced are you? How long have you been doing said craft? Like for me, I've been sewing since I was about 2 years old, quilting since I was about 6 years old, which seems like forever and a day ago. But that experience has gained me a lot of time and a lot of insight to the quilting world. But again, I don't want to break people's banks with the art of quilts, because everybody deserves to have at least one nice quilt in their life. And I've always believed that. Always will. That's something that's never ever going to change. And then the next thing that you got to consider is, how much is fabric? Are you going to the most expensive fabric shop to get your fabrics? Or are you going to a place that has quality fabric but reasonably priced fabric? Because there's a huge difference. There are some places that will rip you off for your fabric, and those kind of stores drive me personally nuts. And that's something that I've always believed and that I always will believe. And then the next thing that you've got to consider is, how much is the fabric? Are you going to the most expensive fabric store possible, or are you going to a place that has reasonably priced fabric that's quality fabric? Because there's a huge difference. The places that rip people off with fabric drive me nuts, because why are you charging that much for the same fabric that I can get somewhere else for a more reasonable price? That's something that's kind of always driven me a little bit nuts. Then you also have to consider, are you doing hand quilting or long arm quilting? Because there's both of those. And then how much are you putting into like the batting or anything else that goes into the quilt that you're making? So there's a lot of things to think about. And when you're pricing your craft, whether that be for quilts, whether that be for crocheted things, whether that be for books, no matter what your craft may be, you've got to decide, number one, what am I worth? What am I worth charging this for? What am I worth? What is my time worth? That is something that you've got to ponder. Number two, how much is the materials going to cost? And with some things, it's going to be a different price each time, but after you've sold so many, you can come up with an estimate on how much it's going to cost you. Like for quilts, no two quilts are going to cost the same price, because no two quilts are the same. There will be similar prices, but no two quilts are going to be the same exact price. But with like books and stuff, since I am also an author, all of my books are roughly close to the same price. Like if you order the Book of Wonders, that's all $12. If you order The Mended Heart, that's $13. If you order A Life Well Lived, that's $13. If you order The Garden of Hidden Messages, that's $13. But if you order a quilt, it's not necessarily going to be the same price as every single quilt that I've ever done, because no two quilts are ever going to be the same. You can use the same pattern, but no two quilt is going to turn out exactly the same. There's going to be some difference somewhere in there. In which that's one reason why I absolutely love and adore quilts, because no two turn out the same, just like no two people are the same. Which is something that I also believe that we kind of need to get back into appreciating, because so many people nowadays are hating differences, which is so sad. And then the next thing that you need to think about when pricing your product, no matter what your product is what is my product contributing to somebody else's life? because it shouldn't just be about, oh, me, 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 me. It should also be about what value is it giving to somebody else. Like with my books, hopefully they're inspiring somebody. Even if they only inspire one person, that means they would have done their job because they reached at least one person. And then my quilts. For me, I want to give people the joy of quilts because there's nothing more comforting than a quilt made with love and care and consideration instead of something that's store-bought. Something that's store-bought can easily get tossed away with zero care in the world. But with something that's homemade, that adds a whole another level of, hey, I feel cared for, I feel comforted, and so on. So for me, I want to be able to provide warmth and joy from my quilts. So what is it that you are wanting to contribute with whatever your craft may be? And then the last thing that you've got to consider when coming up with a price for your things is, where do I want it to be seen? Am I only wanting it online? Am I wanting it at craft shows? Am I wanting my own building where I have everything for sale like an actual store? What are you hoping to reach? What level are you hoping to reach? Because that will also help you determine hey, I should charge this much, or hey, I should really think about this when doing XYZ. It'll really help you build your business to where you want it to go. So I hope that you guys appreciate my little breakdown for quilts. A lot of quilts that I've seen that aren't mine. I've seen a lot of people charge over $1,000 for quilts. But for me, I personally think that's a little high. But I mean, if it works for that person, great. But for me, I want to be as reasonable as possible. So I charge $15 an hour. If you want to see a breakdown of how much I charge for each of my quilts, for a rough estimate, I can put that in the description box below. And do me a favor, can you comment one thing from this video that you found helpful or useful? Because I would really appreciate getting your feedback. And my next YouTube video, I'm also going to be having up, if not this coming week, but next week. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you in the next video.